today. Resilience is really ingrained in Florida State and within our research community, and it's really a growing area of importance worldwide. Just with the number of things that have happened in the last 2 years that have really demonstrated the need for people, places, communities, systems to be able to bend but not break, really demonstrates the need for resilient research. And resilience is an inherently complex challenge. No one recognizes the complexity of that challenge, though, more than the National Institutes of Health. And so I am pleased to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Bill Elwood of NIH's Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. Dr. Elwood supports OBSSR's mission to improve synergy among basic through applied researchers and to help integrate social and behavioral sciences into the overall biomedical research enterprise. He facilitates the NIH Basic Behavioral and Social Science Opportunity Network, coordinates the monthly OBSSR Director Seminar Series, and manages the annual Matilda White Riley Early Stage Investigator Honors Competition. He's previously served as the SRO for the Center for Scientific Review's Community Level Health Promotion Study Section, and prior to joining NIH was a funded researcher throughout the United States and Mexico working on healthcare delivery, mental health, substance abuse, family health and well-being, public housing-based initiatives, and STD HIV prevention. Dr. Elwood, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mike. I'm really happy to be with you all. I jumped the gun a little bit on the first slide, but here you are. Just like FSU, though NIH has funded resilience within health contexts over the years, it's only last year that we founded an agency-wide resilience working group. You can see the website if indeed you'd like to look us up. One of the things that the work group has done over the last year is to formulate this framework in which behavioral, biomedical, cellular researchers can, both within and without the agency, can think about resilience. And to align it with NIH's mission to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and to apply that knowledge to advance health, reduce disease, and illness and disability. This isn't a prescriptive framework, but one of the resources that this slide can give you is a link that will take you to the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts and bring up any active funding opportunity that has resilience in the title or in the description of the funding opportunity. Ooh. Clearly, I needed a bit more rehearsal on how to do PowerPoint with Zoom. Thanks for bearing with me. Earlier efforts in resilience is the NIH Carbon program. This was, as you can see, botanicals and metabolic resiliency. Another growing area in NIH is to stave off cellular senescence. And so the resilience of cells and the resilience of dietary supplements is part of this trans NIH resilience network. Another initiative we've had is supporting research on the integrative mechanisms of resilience across time and scale. The individual institutes and centers, and actually my office, OBSSR, you can see underneath that funding opportunity, all came together to write this FOA, and the projects that were funded from this particular FOA are just wrapping up now in their last year. I'll tell you about one of them shortly. But before I do that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention NIEHS. which has long held a resilience portfolio in the training of workers in disasters in dealing with chemicals. And in fact, NIEHS has a repository of valid and reliable measures to conduct human health research in times of disasters, pandemics, and other catastrophes. And you all may want to consider that perhaps as you collaborate. These are some of the FOAs that we released just this calendar year. In this page and in previous pages, if you have access to this presentation, you'll be able to click the hyperlinks embedded in all of these titles. If you'd like to search titles on your own, that larger URL, larger as in font, will take you to when it was a publication we called the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts. But you can see the array of contexts of disciplines involved in whether it's model. Okay, thank you, Evangeline. You will get these slides, so you can see the range from animal model research to looking at music and health. Okay, so I thought you might have a question. How does a funding opportunity move into an NIH-funded research project? Here's example number one. And this is one of the projects I mentioned. Advancing research on mechanisms of resilience, a study of how self-regulation leads to resilience among National Guard soldiers. Mike was talking about, the timing being great for resilience. We know that life happens. And this particular research project looked at basic training as the stimulus for resilience in National Guard members that they follow over the 2 years after the exigency of basic training. They take biomeasures, self-reported data, and they, in fact, gave the PIs for this at the University of Minnesota, gave the first lecture for the NIH Resilience Network I mentioned toward the beginning. You can find Dr. Polesny and Erb's lecture at the Trans NIH Resilience site, and you can link to this project on the last bullet there. Another project we funded was leverage an existing twin study. We know that people who grow up in disadvantaged neighborhoods often have poor mental and sometimes physical health outcomes over the life course. And a project from this same funding opportunity leveraged a pre-existing adolescent twin study to look at epigenetic, environmental, multiple processes, and engaged neuroimaging with these children to identify the neural networks that are associated with resilience, and to demonstrate their hypothesis that positive influences, even in poor socioeconomic straits and poor air quality, poor water, that goes along with these adverse childhoods, can still lead to markers of resilience. And you can see here how they operationalize that. Okay, now, here's example number two. You'll see with this, excuse me just a moment. This funding opportunity doesn't even have resilience in the title. Instead, it's about the effects of social isolation or connectedness on health and well-being, targeting mechanisms and processes. And you can see the details there. Here's some of the ones that we funded. I think Mike did not tell you that I am a graduate of Florida High School and a couple of non-mentioned universities in Florida. And so I'm familiar with how many seniors we have in the state. This particular project looks at social connectedness and how that can protect cognitive health during the senior years. This is looking at both social processes and the biological processes that can stave off Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias that can come along with age. Again, there's a link to that project. This one looks at adolescents, and which is a difficult time for just about anyone, but even more difficult for adolescents who are on the autism spectrum. And they often have higher rates of loneliness than adolescents without autism diagnoses. And so here we can see how peer relations can confer protective factors to stave off additional negative outcomes for adolescents on the autism spectrum. Whoops. Here is another transitional life example. This one funded at the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, looking at young lesbian, bisexual, and other women who love women. You can see the abbreviation there. And this looks at these vulnerable women from age 14 to 30, when so many different transitions can occur over the life course, becoming an adult, going through your 20s and into 30. And with those changes come changes in residence, in jobs, and in networks. And so they are following these women over time to be able to uncover critical moments that might require resilience, and looking for opportunities in which women persevered despite unfortunate circumstances in their social networks. This is a project that the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development is funding, and it looks at 240 teenage youth who are recruited from the emergency department in hospitals. And it looks to uncover what we've heard so much about in popular news and perhaps from our own children, on bullying through social media. This project is kind of fascinating because it's collecting the online social media messages. It's using electronic sensors to record interactions and then ecological momentary assessments for self-reported data over the course of 6 months. And then adding these data with the demographics of these young people to determine how connectedness, victimization by peers influences their psychological well-being at moments in time and over the course of the study. So the moral of these examples is that you can find across the 24 institutes and centers that comprise NIH, most if not all of them are interested in resilience research projects that in health-related contexts. The majority of projects that NIH fund are through investigator-initiated funding opportunities, meaning they don't necessarily have to be targeted. There are what we call parent announcements through which people can apply. Though what you've learned also is that NIH's increased interest in this regard may lead to a funding opportunity that better suits you. If you're not familiar with NIH Reporter, you can see the link there in that fourth bullet. And you can find previously funded and current projects to see what NIH has funded recently. And there is a function within Reporter called Matchmaker by the check mark, where you can type in your interests and find NIH program directors who are like-minded, with whom you can consult about your ideas. You can see that in that last bullet. And if indeed you have questions, I'll take them, during this last slide, where I recommend the Office of Intramural Training and Education. That's Dr. Sharon Milgram, a colleague, friend, and director of this office. She coordinates intramural training from senior PIs and chiefs all the way through our post-backs who work a year or two in labs. The pandemic was challenging for all of us, obviously, very much so for our post-backs and postdocs who were not able to go into the labs for the longest time. And so Sharon put lots of programming outside the NIH firewall and has been making this material available to research institutions across the country, across the world, and you can find their YouTube channel, and you also can find research resources at the training.nih.gov. Thanks very much. What questions do you have for me, if any?
Bill, thank you so much for joining us and providing some insight into NIH's interest in resilience research. I did get a couple of questions here in the chat. I don't know that we're going to have time to go through all of them, but one of the ones I wanted to ask, which I think is really great, what's one of the most unexpected things that you've learned working on resilience at NIH? Like, what surprised you the most about the development of this as a framework?
That I'll riff on what your Dr. McCullough had to say, and that people are, that it is important to leave room for serendipity. Particularly if you are coming together and colliding with one another for new innovative opportunities, I'd recommend perhaps first seeing what you have in common and how your interests overlap and complement one another, rather than first striving to define what resilience is and is not. One of the things that has surprised me working with others is the insistence on a firm definition before people have had the opportunity to describe all of their interests and what the issues might be.
So a couple of questions. We always have folks who are interested in learning more about the funding process and some of the tips and tricks for, securing funding from whoever our guest agency is. Is there anything that you can offer us in terms of advice for how to prepare proposals related to resilience research? And in particular, any guidance that you might have on preliminary data for R01s?
Wow, that's a lot. As you just described my biography, I indeed once lived on soft money, and you all likely know people who do as well. There are beliefs about the funding process at NIH, at NSF. I've worked with them many times over the years, and some other federal agencies. And sometimes urban legends have some truth to them. Sometimes most times you want to check with an official with to which you're applying. They can give you all kinds of great ideas. That's why my recommendation, in my summary, I recommended contacting a program official with 1 page or less, half-page abstract of your interests. All too often, program directors learn about an application only after a summary statement is issued. And a program director gets that summary statement and your score at the same time you do. And at that point, it's too late to ask a lot of those questions. Program directors can tell you how you better can relate your interest to that institute's mission, and perhaps make recommendations about study sections that would be most sympathetic or have the best expertise for your applications. As for preliminary data, yes and no. If you want to test some grand intervention on a specific target population for a purpose, then, and you are asking millions of dollars in order to do that, you would expect that reviewers would expect to see some sort of pilot test on how your hypothesized mechanisms of action are activated and cause a change in people. That said, you might be conducting an R01 to collect preliminary or descriptive data, because R01s, the maximum is 5 years, although they can be renewable, but they don't have to be. Maybe you want 3 years of money to collect resilience-related data on humans along is it the Treasure Coast that's the curve of the Panhandle? I'm making this up as I go along because I worked on a large project from Hurricane Katrina and the many disasters that came out of that. You want to collect Gulf water, rivers, shellfish, regular fish, people, because this hasn't been done before. So yes, preliminary data are appropriate based on the research project you're proposing, not necessarily just because it's an R01.
Got it. Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon and just helping us understand more about how NIH thinks about this. Folks, Bill's his contact information is there on screen now. And with that, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
You're very, very welcome. I hope the rest of your meeting is very successful.